Hey guys, how's it going? This is Brandon Bias from check.com, and welcome to another very amazing, exciting, creative, and slightly confusing Tutorial Tuesday. Wow, that was a long intro. Alright, so today what we're going over is a text effect called the Eroded Metal Text Effect. And no, I didn't come up with this text effect. I actually followed somebody else's tutorials and tweaked it a little bit to my liking. Because I don't know, it was just a cool text effect that I found like a year ago or something like that. And I just thought it was worth sharing, so what the heck, right? Okay, so I'll go ahead and put the link to that original tutorial in the description if you feel like checking it out. Otherwise, just go ahead and stick along with this video and just, see what you think. So let's go ahead and take a gander at what we got going on here. Okay, so here it is, the Eroded Metal Text Effect. And obviously it's aptly named because it's metally looking. It's got some erosion looking stuff on it, and I've even thrown in some paint splatters here and there to kind of spice it up a little bit. And it also has a nice little glass background because, I don't know, that's what they had in the original tutorial, and I like glass, so what the heck, right? So this thing is it's not exactly easy to do, so I'm going to try to explain it in a way that newer people in Photoshop can understand, but if you're not able to finish this tutorial in the end, don't throw a fit over it because it is a little bit confusing to do. So anyway, let's go ahead and get right into the tutorial. So the first thing that we want to do is essentially make a pattern that we can use to create the holes in the text. So let's make a new document specifically for that. So let's name this holes. And we'll change the width and the height to 100 pixels each. We'll keep the resolution at 72. The color mode, it doesn't really matter, but we'll keep that at RGB. And the background contents can be white. So we'll hit OK. And I'm just going to hit Control 0 to zoom into canvas size here. And let's invert this by hitting Control or Command I. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab our Elliptical Marquee tool. And with that, we're going to make sure that we have a feather of 0, anti-alias checkmarked, the style set to fixed size, and both the width and height set to 25 pixels. And so if you click and hold somewhere on the document here, you should see a nice perfect circle. And we're just going to put this somewhere in the upper left hand corner. And let's go ahead and fill that in with white by hitting Control backspace. That's Command backspace if you're on a Mac. Man, I'm mixing up my operating systems here. Craziness. So anyway, before we do anything, now that we've got this filled out, let's go ahead and bring up our rulers by hitting Control R or Command R if you're on a Mac. And let's just click and drag from this top ruler on down to the middle of the ellipse here. And we'll do the same thing for the vertical side right here. So now we've got a nice cross in the middle of the circle. And so now what we'll do is we'll hold the Shift key and we'll hit the down arrow 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty simple. And that just nudges it down 40 pixels total. So it's 10 pixels per arrow push, or however you want to phrase that. So let's go ahead and fill this in with white again with Control backspace. And let's add another ruler to the middle of that ellipse. And this time we'll go right 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And fill that in with white as well. And put another ruler in the middle. And then we'll go up 4 times. Fill that in with white. And then we'll go down twice and to the left twice to make another ellipse right here in the middle. And now we'll deselect that with Control D. So the reason we're doing this is we're trying to make a pattern that has a perfect repetition to it. So what we're going to do is we'll make a rectangular marquee tool and we'll make a selection around the box that we made with our 4 guides here. And we'll go to Image, Crop. And so now if you can imagine that if you were to duplicate this left, right, up, and down, this particular texture is going to duplicate around perfectly because these quarter circles right here are going to become whole circles if you were to duplicate the pattern all around it. So that's the whole purpose of, the cropping and all of that, even though it looks kind of strange, all right? So with this all selected here, let's go to Edit, and we'll go to Define Pattern. And we'll just name that holes and call it good, hit OK. And now we can just go ahead and close this out without saving because we don't need it anymore. So now let's go ahead and make our new document for our eroded text. And for this, I'm going to set it to 1920 by 1080 because that's just the overall dimensions that I like. It fits my resolution of my computer, and I can make it into a wallpaper whenever I want. So that's just what I'm going to stick with. Now for the color mode, make sure you're on RGB, otherwise you're not going to get the colors. And we'll keep the background contents as white, and we'll hit OK. So now let's go ahead and select our text tool with the letter T, and I'm just going to click somewhere in the lower left hand area over here. And for the font that I'm going to use Arial, and I'm going to set that font style to bold, and let's set the font size to about 700 points, the anti-aliasing to sharp, and of course the color of the text needs to be set to black. Alright, so with that, let's go ahead and type out PSD in capitals or whatever it is you want to type out. And also something that I like to do is I like to have these all selected, and we'll open up the character menu on the side over here. If you don't have that, just go to Window Character. And I like having this this VA thing. I always forget what it's called. It's the tracking method. I like to set that to something like -50 because when it's at 0, the letters are spread apart a little bit. So I like having the letters a little bit closer together. So once you've got that going on, I have someone texting me. Shut up. So anyway, once you've got these all together like that, just hit the little check mark to confirm that text. So now what we want to do is center the text on the document. So the easiest way that I know to do that is to select the Move tool, and then we'll select the entire canvas by hitting Control or Command A. And then up here we'll select the second and the fifth icons that are underneath View, Window, and Help. And that should center it on the document for you. So now let's go ahead and deselect that. And now we're going to go apply the pattern overlay onto the PSD layer here. And if you go to click the little drop down arrow for the pattern, you should see the holes pattern that you made just a few seconds ago. So now let's just go ahead and put the not the opacity, but the scale down to about 50%, so that way the holes are a little bit smaller. And we'll also go ahead and add a stroke, and let's change the position to inside, and I'm going to put the size to about maybe 15 pixels. Now keep in mind, if you're working on a smaller or a larger document, you might need to mess with the size of the stroke to get something that looks a little bit better with whatever it is you're working with. Alright? So now with that, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And now what we're going to do is duplicate this PSD layer by hitting Control J or Command J if you're on a Mac. And we're going to right click this PSD copy and click Rasterize Layer Style. And then we'll just go ahead and invert that by hitting Control I or Command I if you happen to be on a Mac. And we'll also go to the background layer and we'll invert that as well by hitting Control I. So that way we can see the PSD text that we've got going on right here. So the next thing we're going to do is create a couple of channels because we need some selections for some particular masks and such later on in the tutorial. So just kind of follow these next steps carefully because they are kind of essential. So let's go ahead and go to the Channels tab over here. And we've got all of these channels and such. If you're not really familiar with them, we got the red, green, and blue channel, which combine into the RGB channel, which is just the overall look of what you normally see in every picture. So we're going to hold our mouse over the thumbnail of the RGB channel, and while holding the Control key, since I'm on a PC, it would be the Command key if you're on a Mac, give that thumbnail a click, and you'll see that we have some marching ants going around the white areas of our text, letting us know that it's made into a selection. So now what we'll do is, making sure that we're still in the Channels tab, we'll add a new channel, and we're just going to call this Text with Holes. Pretty easy to remember. And I know that I've got white as my background color, so I'm going to fill this in with white by hitting Control, Backspace, or Command Delete if you're on a Mac. And then I'll deselect that with Control D. So now we've got this new channel with our text with our holes. So now let's go back and select the RGB channel, and we'll go back to our layers, and let's go ahead and delete this PSD copy. And so now we've got this text that's just left with the holes in it. Now if you are planning on adding the splatters in later, these could be coming in handy later on. So let's go ahead and make those into a channel as well. So we'll control click the thumbnail for the RGB channel. We'll make a new channel. We'll just call this Holes. And we'll fill that in with white, again with Control Backspace and Control D to deselect that. And there we go, we have another new channel. So let's select the RGB channel again. going back to the PSD layer, and we'll grab our text tool by hitting the letter T, and we'll change the color of this back to white. And also we're gonna have to open up the effects for the layer here, right here, and we'll just trash that pattern overlay. So that way it's just the slimmed down version of the text, because we still have that stroke being applied to the text. Okay? So now we want to go ahead and go back to the channels, select the RGB channels, the selection there, make another new little alpha channel here, and let's just rename this to Slim Text. And we'll fill that in with white with Control Backspace, and then again we'll deselect that with Control D. So there we go, we've got 3 new channels. We have text with holes, holes, and slim text. So just a little brief preview of all those, and we'll go back to the RGB channel, and we'll go back to our layers and get on with the next step. Now for the rest of the tutorial, we actually do not need the actual white part of the text. So we'll just really quick just delete the effects on the PSD there, and then we'll change the color back to black, and we'll hit OK. And let's actually go ahead and set up the background of the overall document to make it that glassy look that you saw in the demonstration. So let's go over here to the background layer, and we'll give it a double click, and we'll just rename that BG for background. And making sure we have black and white as our foreground color for almost the rest of this tutorial, we're going to go to Filter, Render, and we're not doing the clouds yet. Let's do the lens flare right here. And for the lens flare, just make sure that the lens flare is wow, I've said that like 300 times now. So make sure that flare is in the middle of the document with the brightness of 160% and the lens type set to 50 to 300 millimeter zoom. And with that, we'll hit OK. And then we'll go to Filter. Oop, that's View. We'll go Filter, Render, Difference Clouds. And so now we've got this random craziness going on, but we want to desaturate it by hitting Control-Shift-U or Command-Shift-U if you're on a Mac. And next we'll go to Filter. And normally what we want to go to is the glass filter under the Distort menu, but it's not here, so we're going to have to go to the Filter Gallery and then open up the Distort folder right here and click Glass. And the settings on that are going to have a distortion of 20, a smoothness of 2, the texture set to frosted, and the scaling at 100%. And with that, we'll hit OK. And so that way we've got this nice, beautiful, glassy background. But we're going to spice it up a little bit more by adding a gradient overlay. And with that, we're going to set the blend mode to multiply with an opacity of, let's say, 70%, and we'll hit OK. And so now with this PSD layer selected, let's go ahead and set this as the background or the basis of the metal text. And by that, we're just going to add a drop shadow to keep it simple. And what I like to do for the drop shadow is I like to set the opacity to 100%. I like to amp up the distance to about 15 pixels or so. We'll change the spread to about 10 and the size to maybe 25. And with that, I'll hit OK because I already know that I like those settings and we got something pretty good going on now. And let's go ahead and close these up and make a new layer over here. And let's name this new layer Metal. And let's go ahead and go back to the channels. And we are going to control click the thumbnail for text with holes. And then we'll go back to our layers. And we're going to use a shortcut Shift Backspace or Shift Delete if you're on a Mac. And just use color. And for this, we're going to set the RGB to 50, 50, 50. And so the number on that turns out to 32, 32, 32 if you want to type that in instead. And we'll hit OK. And we'll hit OK again. And then once again, we'll deselect that with Control D. And so there we go. We've got the basis of our metal text. So with the metal layer selected, let's go ahead and add a pattern overlay. And this pattern overlay is going to need a little bit of tweaking. So you're going to have to go to this little cog over here, and you're going to have to click on Rock Patterns. And with that, you'll just hit OK. And no, I don't want to save the texture there. And so now you'll have all of these rock textures going on. And you can just go ahead and click this first one here, which is called Black Marble, and we'll close that up. And the original tutorial said to change the blend mode to soft light to kind of add that rocky texture to it. But I like to make things a little bit more intense, and I change it to hard light instead, just to kind of make things a little bit more interesting looking. And now we'll go ahead and hit OK. And so let's go ahead and duplicate this metal layer by hitting Control J or Command J once again if you're on a Mac. And then we'll just go ahead and trash that effects icon, and let's rename this to, what is it called? We'll just rename that to Paint, and then we'll duplicate that and rename that to Grain. So there we go. Now we've got Grain, Paint, and Metal. And of course, Paint and Grain don't have any effects on them. And let's go ahead and turn off the Grain for the time being, because we don't really need to worry about that for the time being. And so the first thing we're going to do with the paint layer is add a layer mask onto it. And I want to see exactly what's going on with the layer mask here. So I'm going to hold the Alt key since I'm on a PC. If you're on a Mac, you're going to hold the Option key, and you're going to give that mask a click to see what's going on with the mask, all right? So with this, we're going to go to Filter, Render, Clouds, and then we'll go to Filter, Render, Difference Clouds, and then to reapply the difference clouds, we're going to hit Control F or Command F if you're on a Mac, and then we'll hit Control F a second time to reapply that difference clouds again. Okay, so now we're going to mess with the levels of this by hitting Control L or Command L if you're on a Mac, and we'll just change this 255 to 55, and we'll hit OK. And so now we want to see the original part of the image, so we'll just click on the thumbnail for the paint layer, and that should bring you back to the original view here. So now let's go ahead and change the blend mode of this to soft light, and then we'll give this guy a, let's do a gradient overlay. And so let's go ahead and change this gradient overlay to an overlay blend mode with an opacity of 70%. And let's also add in a drop shadow. And let's see, we want the drop shadow to basically just have a distance of 0, and we'll call that good. And then let's go back and add a inner glow here. And for that, we'll change the blend mode to color burn with an opacity of 35% and the color set to black. And we'll change the size to like 2. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit OK and close this up. And let's go ahead and make another new layer above the paint. And we're just going to rename this to color. And for this, let's go ahead and grab our gradient tool by hitting the letter G. And normally up in the left-hand corner over here, you would normally see a black to white gradient. But to change this up, we're just going to go ahead and give that a click. And just go ahead and choose whichever gradient it is that you would like to use. The tutorial said to use this blue to red to yellow gradient right here. If you want to, you can kind of change this up. Maybe make the blue a little bit lighter or something of the sort. It doesn't really matter. Just kind of mess with it as you so choose. And so now we'll just click and drag somewhere from maybe the bottom right hand area below the D to the left above the P to kind of make a nice little gradient there. And now we'll set the blend mode of this to screen. And we also want this to be just applied to the text. So to make this into a clipping mask, what we're going to have to do is put our cursor between the paint and the color layer and hold the Alt key if you're on a PC or the Option key if you're on a Mac, and we'll give that a click. And so that way that color will just be applied to the paint layer, which has a mask on it to make it look a little bit more interesting. Whoops, I'm accidentally changing up the blend mode here. There we go. So this should be the result of all of that craziness that we just did. Oh man, that's weird, but it looks pretty cool, so we're ready to go on to the next step. Now let's go ahead and select the grain layer, and we'll turn that on, and we're going to change the blend mode to color dodge. And I've noticed that this is being applied to the entire text, and we only want it to be applied to the paint area. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and hold the Alt key since we're on a PC. Again, that would be the Option key if you're on a Mac. And click and drag the mask from the paint layer to the grain layer, and that will duplicate that mask so that way it's also applied to the grain layer. So now let's go ahead and select the thumbnail for the grain layer, and then we'll go to Filter, and we'll go back to the filter gallery, and under the artistic section should be something called film grain. So give that a click there. And for this, we're just going to set the grain to 10, the highlight area and the intensity both to 0. And we'll hit OK. And if you want to leave that just as it is in terms of grain and how grainy it is and all that, you can just leave it as it is and call it good. But I like to intensify the grain a little bit, so I'm going to bring up the levels by hitting Control L or Command L if you're on a Mac. And let's just go ahead and bring in the white slider till it's kind of close to the edge of that little peak there. And let's go ahead and move the midtones to about 0.5-ish, and maybe bring in the black slider a little bit as well. And let's go ahead and bring that in just a little bit more. That's actually looking pretty good. So you can toggle the preview on and off to see what changes you're making to the grain there, and just kind of tweak with that until you get settings that you like, and we'll hit OK. And so now we're in pretty good shape with the paint and also the grain. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of depth to the text by adding in some highlights and such. So we'll make a new layer, and we'll call this highlight. And now we're just going to go ahead and control click the thumbnail for the metal layer right there to load it up as a selection. Or alternatively, you can go to the channels and control click the text with holes thumbnail. Either way, it's going to be the same result. And now we're going to make sure we are on one of our Marquee tools. So either the rectangular, the elliptical, or the single row ones. It doesn't really matter. Just have one of those selected. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see a little bit better what's going on. Okay? And I'm going to zoom up a little bit right here. Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to nudge the selection up one and to the left one using the arrow keys on our keyboard. And then we're going to fill that in with white with control backspace. And then we're going to move the selection down one and to the right one, and then hit the delete key to delete that selection, and then control D to deselect. And so if I zoom out and toggle this on and off, you should see the overall effect that we get from doing those steps there. So now we've got a nice highlight within all of the holes, and we also have a highlight along the upper left hand corner of the text here. Now personally, I think this is a little bit too intense, so let's go ahead and tone the fill down to about 60%, or the opacity, one of the two, doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some more highlights. So new layer, highlight 2. And for this, we are going to go to the channels and load the slim text as a selection. And we'll go back to the layers here. This time we're going to go down 2 and to the right 2, fill it in with white, go up 2 and to the left 2, back to where we were, and delete that. And so that way we should have a nice little gleam on the inside of the text right here. Looking pretty good. But if you want to, you can kind of soften this up by going to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can set it between 1 and 1.5, somewhere in there, and hit OK to kind of soften that up a little bit. And of course, if we have highlights, we kind of need some shadows, right? So let's go ahead and add a new layer. We'll name this Shadow. And we'll go back and load up the slim text as a selection again. And this time we're going to go up 2 and to the left 2, fill that in with black, and then go down 2 and to the right 2, and then delete that and deselect. So that way we have this little black little line going along the upper left-hand area of the selection and all that. And let's go ahead and hit Control F to reapply that Gaussian blur to that shadow there. And so I think we're ready to add in some more shadows. So let's make another new layer. We'll call it Shadow 2. And this time around, we're actually going to go ahead and load the PSD layer as a selection. So I'm going to control click the T right here to load up the PSD layer. And this time we're not going to move the selection just yet. Instead, we're going to immediately fill that in with black by hitting Alt Backspace or Option Delete if you're on a Mac. And then we'll go up 2 and to the left 2, and we'll delete that and deselect. And that way it'll add that to the lower right hand area of the text. And we'll just do a Control F to reapply that Gaussian blur. Alright. And so now we'll add one last highlight. So we'll do highlights 3 on a new layer over here. And we'll load the PSD selection again. And so let's fill it in with white with Control Backspace. And then we'll go down 2 and to the right 2. And we'll delete that. And then we can use Control D once again to deselect. And then Control F to reapply that Gaussian blur. Now, personally, I think that the highlights are a little bit too intense, so I'm going to go back through and select all these highlights and put them all down to about 60%. And so you can see a little before and after, just kind of tones it down a little bit nicely, and we'll just keep the shadows at 100% there. Now, if you want to, and you're kind of lazy, and you feel like you've done enough work, you can actually call this good right here, because this is basically where the original tutorial left off. And you could potentially just be done right now. But if you want to go ahead and add a little bit more pizzazz, and you feel like giving that extra flair with some of the with some of the splatters and such, what we can do is we can go back to the color layer, and we'll duplicate that by hitting Control J or Command J if you're on a Mac over there. And let's add a new layer beneath that, and we'll call this Splatters. And while holding the Alt key, let's click between these two layers to make another clipping mask. And we're going to set the blend mode of the splatters layer. We're going to change that to, let's do Vivid Lights with a fill of about 50%. Okay? So now let's go ahead and load up some paintbrushes and such. Now these brushes I've actually had a long time, since about Photoshop CS4, but it's a great pack that I've basically assembled myself using other people's paint splatters and such. So if you want to download these, just ask and I'll put a download link in the description for you. And so basically we'll just click some random splatters and such, and with your foreground color set to black, just kind of click wherever you want those to be. And we'll also just click some other random ones over here, maybe put one down there. And I'm just kind of doing this really sloppy right now, but it's just to kind of give you the idea of what you can do to kind of make this a little bit interesting. And you know what, let's go ahead and rotate this. So we'll go to the brush panel over here. You can hit F5 to bring that up, and we'll rotate this like so, maybe a little bit more. And we'll put that right there. Beautiful. Looking pretty snazzy. Maybe we'll put that a little bit lower. Anyway, so you just mess with those paint splatters as you see fit. And also, if you want to add a little bit more to this, we can add a vignette onto it. So maybe add a vignette like so. Yeah, I'm not going to go into how to make that vignette. This is just an action pack that I made pretty recently. I'll go ahead and put the download link into the description if you want to have this action pack that I made. And also what we can do to add a little bit more to this is by going to the adjustments panel over here, and we'll add a gradient map on top of all this. And we'll set the blend mode to color dodge, and we'll set the fill to 50%. And so that way, if you toggle that on and off, you can see that it just adds a nice little bit of brightness to the overall image over here. So let's just go ahead and see what this sucker is looking like. Alright, so this is actually looking really good just as it is. I think we're pretty much finished here, but one last thing that I probably should mention, now that I think about it, is that if you decide to go with a different blending mode for the splatters over here, for example, let's say you decide to go with hard light instead of vivid light, and maybe changed up the fill a little bit, you'll notice that the splatters start covering up the holes of the text. So the way you fix that is by going back to the channels over here and loading the holes channel as a selection, and then with the splatters selected, holding the Alt key, you can click that layer mask icon to get rid of all those holes and all that in the splatters there. So either way, I kind of like having it back at vivid light with 50% opacity for, you know, my own personal reasons and all that. But other than that, if that's too confusing, just leave it as it is, and we are basically done. So, congratulations guys, you made a pretty cool looking effect here, hopefully, and I'm hoping that this was good enough of a tutorial for people to understand and all that. So, it would be great if you guys just left me some feedback, let me know if you liked the tutorial, and if you do, just, you know, maybe you can do me a favor and like the video, maybe share it with some other friends and all that, if you have friends that are into Photoshop and all that. And yeah, just let me know what you think, leave comments, and just give me some feedback, because feedback is always fantastic. And once again, hope you guys learned something new. If you have any suggestions for more tutorials in the future, don't hesitate to let me know, just by leaving a comment, sending me a message, talking to me on Facebook, anything of the sort. And so anyway, I've been at this for way too long now, so I'm just going to go ahead and call it a good day. So I will talk to you guys some other time, and I will see you next Tuesday. Peace out.